just summarize all that.
I don't know how much we can overrule. We can see if we can get
That would be a valid suggestion.
to be or not align them up, realign completely. Try to keep it as high level as possible.
I didn't write anything down. I had to make something.
Just keep it simple.
Okay, 30 seconds. We have to wait till 7 on the nose, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We can't start early.
Yes, sir.
You let me know when we're ready.
All right.
Just as long as you don't start the public hearings before 7,
Okay.
it shouldn't be too
All
bad.
right.
They won't haul you, like put you beneath the jail or anything.
Oh, that was second.
Well, Matt's on top of it. Good to go. Okay, we'd like to call the June meeting of the Goodson County Planning Commission to order. Ms. Worley, could you confirm that we have a quorum?
All present, you do have a quorum. Thank
Thank you very much. If everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for an invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear Lord, we ask that you watch over our meeting this evening. We ask your guidance that we act in the best interest of all citizens of this county. And please watch out for those who protect us, our family and friends. We ask all this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes of the last meeting? Are there any comments, corrections, additions, revisions? Hearing none.
I move that we accept them as written.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are accepted as submitted. Okay, Ms. Worley, are there any changes to tonight's agenda?
No, sir.
None at all. I'd like to open a citizen comment period. This would be for any items that are not on tonight's agenda. Just if you have something you'd like to speak to, please come forward, give your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. Anyone have anything to bring to the commission? Seeing none, we will close the public comment period. Ms. Worley, would you call the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, your first 2 items this evening are commission action items. They do not require a public hearing. The first one is in District 4 and 5. It's a major tentative plat review. It's an application filed by H.H. Hunt, LLC, requesting approval of a tentative subdivision plat for 476 lot age-restricted subdivision.
Good evening.
Hi, Greg.
Greg Garrison, Principal Planner with Goodson County. This is a tentative subdivision plat approval for the recently approved H.H. Hunt development. This tentative plat are only reviewed by the Planning Commission. There is no board action or recommendation needed. Subject property is between Hockett Road and Capital One Drive. This is a layout that you're seeing here, and the proposed community center will be there in the center, as you're seeing. This application is seeking tentative plat approval for the entire site. PUD plans and final plats for each phase will be administratively approved. The property was recently rezoned at the March 13th, 2018 board meeting. Proffered conditions conditions limit the density to 520 age-restricted units. This proposal is for 476 age-restricted housing units, which comes out to about 2.29 units per acre. The code permits 2 units per acre. However, Section 9.4 of the zoning ordinance permits an increase in density through the environmental incentives. Those incentives include pedestrian trails, community center, swimming pool, passive recreation amenities such as benches, bike racks, etc., and active recreation amenities such as pickleball and bocce ball courts. Single-family lot sizes range from about 55 feet to 65 feet wide. The townhouse units are a minimum of 28 feet wide. This will be the first townhouse development in the county. Access will be provided from Tuckahoe Creek Parkway and Broad Branch Drive. Currently, there are no side yard setback requirements for townhouses, and staff will be drafting an ordinance amendment very in the near future to address this. The plan is consistent with the approved proffered conditions and appears to meet the subdivision requirements. Some of the conditions these are typical conditions that are placed on tentative plats. Number 1, road plans shall be reviewed and approved by VDOT prior to final plat. Number 2, roads shall be built to state standards prior to review of the final plat, or a letter of credit or performance bonds shall be provided to Goochland County. Number 3, road names shall be approved by Goochland County, and the names shall be placed on the final plat. Number 4, all water and sewer plans shall be approved by the county utility department prior to review of the final plat. Number 5, the applicant shall adhere to all public utility permitting process requirements. Number 6, all utility and drainage easements shall be shown on the final plat. Number 7, a diagram shall be provided showing typical setbacks for lots in the subdivision, including corner lot clearance. Number 8, the radius turnouts for all intersections shall be shown on the final plat. All dimensions and meets and bounds of lot lines shall be shown for all lots, and the acreages and square footage shall be provided. Number 10, all notes on the tentative plat shall be placed on the final plat. Number 11, the proffered zoning conditions shall be placed on the final plat. Number 12, the open space shall be clearly labeled in the area identified on the boundaries of the open space shown by meets and bounds. Number 13, the subdivision shall be designed and constructed in accordance with the provisions set forth in the zoning case RZ 2017-00001 and in compliance with the county code. Number 14, the land coverage ratio shall be required with the POD. Number 15, the magisterial district shall be shown on the final plat. Number 16, required parking lot shall be provided with the POD. And number 17, the landscape and lighting plan shall be provided. And number 18, the environmental incentives shall also be provided. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have one, gentlemen. Greg, you mentioned that this is the entire plat that we're seeing tonight for this project?
Right. Yes, sir.
But it was presented and originally approved in the rezoning case for 520 units.
Yes.
It has been reduced to 476.
Yes, and that's due to wetlands, environmental features such as floodplain or topography, wetlands, etc.
Right. So it will be 476. There is no reserve for additional units. There's no space for additional units.
Not to my knowledge.
So it's going to be 476. There was a balance between townhouses and single-family units. Has that changed? That percentage?
Not to my, from the rezoning case, not to my knowledge, no.
So I think actually there's less townhouses.
Yeah, maybe you could come forward and let us know who you are. And
I'm Andrew Browning with Youngblood Tyler and Associates, representing H.H. Hunt. Yes, we went in and we actually made a lot of the lots larger, and once they started developing a product. So I think the minimum lot size that we actually have on here is 60 foot versus 55 feet, so that decreased the density, and we went in and added some larger townhouses. So the actual number of townhouses and single-family lots decreased, which, it's a mixture of that brought the total number down.
good.
What's the approximate percentage of townhomes? Or the number, either the number or the percentage of?
I don't know that right offhand.
It was about 40%
Yeah.
before, I don't know. what the new-
Probably 30% now, maybe.
Yeah, and since the guidelines as far as setbacks for townhouses haven't been established, what do you envision them being? Maybe you're not the one to answer that, maybe Mr. Coleman or Mr. Garrison?
Well, between each of the units, they'll have to provide 10 feet. So that's 20 feet between building and building, right?
Okay,
15 foot front yard setbacks.
okay, and that's from the road,
Correct.
okay? Because I'm assuming they aren't gonna be any sidewalks or anything like that.
There are sidewalks on the streets here.
Okay, yes,
That's a proffered condition.
okay,
Does that answer your question?
okay, yes.
Anyone else? Yeah, we need to take action on this, right?
Nope, no, we just need to.
All right, are there any other questions, comments
No,
for the staff or the applicant? All right, we act on motion.
I make a motion, recommend approval.
okay.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded that we approve the plat as submitted. All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The submittal is approved. Recommended for approval.
Get to the next slide. All right, Greg Garrison, Principal Planner with Goochland County. This is a tentative subdivision plat approval for the recently approved Reader's Branch subdivision. Again, tentative plats are only reviewed by the Plan Commission. There is no board recommendation for this one as well. Subject property is on the east line of Hockett Road, just south of Broad Street. Again, they're seeking tentative plat approval for the entire site, and then the POD and final plats for each phase will be administratively approved. The 152.91 acre property was recently rezoned at the April 17th, 2018 board meeting. Proffered conditions limit the density to 303 units. This proposal is for 301 single-family detached housing units, which comes out to 1.98 units per acre, just under the 2 units per acre that's permitted. Single-family lot size shall be a minimum of 65 feet wide. The plan does show 3 pocket parks per the proffered conditions, as well as the buffer along Hockett Road, Hickory Haven subdivision, and along the perennial and intermittent stream, the trail system along Hockett Road and within the development, internal sidewalks, stub road connections, right-of-way improvements along Hockett Road, and the plan is consistent with the approved proffered conditions and appears to meet the subdivision requirements. These conditions are the same conditions that you saw on the H.H. Hunt plat, with the exception of the last condition, because they don't need to have those environmental incentives because they're not exceeding their density requirements. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, just one. So as in the previous case, there's been a reduction in the number of units from the approved rezoning case, but in this case, only 2 units less, 303 to 301.
Correct.
Everything else is complicit. Everything else is the same.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Any comments or questions?
No.
I move we approve the submission.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The plat submittal has been recommended for approval. Ms. Worley?
Mr. Chairman, your next item this evening is public hearing items. The first one is in District 3, CU 2018-4. It's an application filed by LNB Ponds, LLC, requesting a conditional use permit for a bed and breakfast proposed short-term rental unhosted at 2094 Shepherdtown Road on tax map number 43175. The 107-acre property is zoned agricultural limited, and the CUP is required by Article 3.6, proposed to be Article 3.39 of the Goochland County zoning ordinance. The comprehensive plan designates this area as rural enhancement.
Good evening. Pearson, Principal Planner.
Hi, Greg.
This is a request for a conditional use permit for bed and breakfast / short-term rental unhosted at 2094 Shepherdtown Road. Subject property is about 3 miles west of Randolph Elementary School on Shepherdtown Road. 2035 Comprehensive Plan recommends rural enhancement. Current zoning is agriculture limited, and most of the surrounding properties are agriculture limited as well, with the exception to the north, it's rural preservation, and that is slated to be the future Breeze Hill subdivision. Most of the parcel is pasture land. The applicant is proposing to rent out 2 units from an existing 2,200 square foot house. Number 1 is the James house and is approximately 1,300 square feet. And unit number 2, the Rosalie house, is approximately 850 square feet. Each unit will have its own separate ingress and egress. This is the James house here. And this is the Rosalie house. This is an existing condition. It's been a duplex for quite some time. So, a bed and breakfast short-term rental unhosted is defined as a dwelling where a portion or the entire dwelling is used for sleeping or lodging for transient renters, which is rented for less than 30 consecutive days. Building code limits transient lodging in a single-family house for 10 people or less. More than 10 people would be considered a hotel and would require substantial building code changes to the existing structure. A community meeting was held on April 16th, 2018. Staff, Planning Commissioner Mr. Duke, and 1 neighbor attended that meeting, and the neighbor did support this request. Should the Commission recommend approval, staff recommends the following conditions. All overnight stay and all activities associated with the bed and breakfast shall be limited to no more than 8 people. This limit may be increased up to 10 people with an adequate increase in septic system capacity as approved by the Health Department. Number 2, there shall be no outdoor music, amplified or acoustic, after 11 p.m. Number 3, the property owner shall post and maintain no trespassing signs along the property boundary. Number 4, the site shall maintain a residential appearance. Number 5, renters shall not hunt or discharge firearms from the property. Number 6, the property owner shall ensure that all renters and guests are informed in writing of these conditions applicable to them, including conditions 1, 2, 3, and 5. Number 7, there shall be a working smoke detector and working carbon monoxide monitor installed and maintained in a common area in both units. Smoke alarms shall be installed and maintained in each room used for overnight accommodations for renters and guests. Number 8, property may not be advertised or operated as a short-term rental or bed and breakfast if violations of any applicable state and local laws, ordinances, or regulations relating to short-term rentals or bed and breakfast uses have occurred on more than 3 occasions. Number 9, this conditional use shall expire July 3rd, 2023, and it can apply for an extension. And number 10 is the typical transfer of ownership. If the property owners transfer or enter into a long-term lease for the property, they need to notify the planning department of this in writing. The new owner leasee of this cup and its conditions with a copy to the planning office as well. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions for staff?
This is 2 separate buildings. Typically in a bed and breakfast, the landlord provides the breakfast as part of the package. Is this just a bed and they do their own cooking, the renters?
This is an unhosted short-term rental.
Okay.
So the owner won't be on the premises.
So it's not really a bed and breakfast, it's really
Correct. That you're going to hear Mrs. Hunter give her presentation on the short-term rental unhosted shortly.
Right, okay.
Right. Any other questions for staff? Is the applicant present? And would you like to come forward and make a brief presentation? Just give us your name and address.
Hi, I'm Ellen Pons, and I live at 2094 Shepherdtown Road 50 days of the year, and the rest of the year I live in Bel Air, Maryland. And the house was my great uncle's from the 1950s, and came down through family members, and I lived there in the 80s. And now the house, I go back and forth, and it's in a, I compare it to like renting a house at the ocean. It's set up for guests. I don't have many personal belongings in the, closets. It's the kitchen set up for hosting, and the rest of the farm has a lease for people that do riding, so there's other tenants on the farm. And I come in back and forth and do maintenance. And you asked about bed and breakfast. There's no breakfast. It's a new term. It's with smartphones and things. It's a request made through a computer app. Somebody generally does a search for the Richmond zip code or Goochland zip code. I get people that are in town for reunions, graduations, children's graduations, or I have a couple that come from Indiana now every month since January whose son had twins in the area, and they like to stay separate. And so it's been a great situation for me. It helps me pay my mortgage on my farm. I maintain the house in a better condition than I did because I have guests constantly,
Right.
and they let me know right away if something's wrong. So I think it's a great thing, and it showcases the county to tourists.
I have one. Would this be considered an Airbnb? Is that the right phrase?
I do there are two platforms, Airbnb, and there's one called VRBO, which stands for Vacation Rental by Owner.
Right,
And,
I've heard of that too.
So I use
Right.
both those platforms.
Right, and so it's all done over the internet? And, I mean, you collect the payment that way, and,
They collect, the two entities collect the payment and
right.
take their cut, give me a piece.
And so there is no real estate agent or agency, it's just these two platforms?
Yeah, usually, yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Any questions for the applicant?
No, none of the applicants.
Does anybody else live on the property permanently?
I do. I
So you
have
have-
another tenant house.
It takes care of the property itself.
He's there he's overnight. I employ different people to help take care of the property. I have a landscape guy, and I have people that help clean. So, but yes, I do have another tenant, so I do have a presence, although it's not his responsibility to monitor those guests, but he does help
Very good.
if I'm not available.
Thank you. Any further questions for Ms. Pons? Thank you very much.
Thank
I'd like to open this application for any public comment. Is anyone present who would like to speak in favor or in opposition to this application? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period. Since we had no responses, there is no need for the applicant to follow up in this case. Any further comments from staff? Any further questions from the commission? What's your pleasure, gentlemen?
I'll make a motion that we recommend approval.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Ms. Pons.
Mr. Chairman, your second public hearing item this evening is a rezoning case in District 5, an application filed by Cameron General Contractors requesting a proffer amendment to a rezoning case RZ 1998-5 to allow for a home for the aged or retirement community at 12330 Patterson Avenue on tax map number 64174A. The property is zoned B1 with proffers and is 38.88 acres. The comp plan designates this area as commercial.
Thank you, Ms. Worley. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Tom Coleman, Principal Planner. As it relates to the proposal by Cameron General Contractors, there will be 2 applications for that and 2 separate public hearings. I will be doing the presentation on the proffer amendment request. Ms. Debbie Bird will be doing the presentation on the conditional use permit that relates to the floodplain. So as Ms. Worley said, the first application is a proffer amendment. They do want to amend proffers that were approved in 1998 to add a residential use to allow for a residential senior living facility. The site has about 38.9 acres. It's located on Patterson Avenue. It has several zonings on it. It's Zone B1 with proffers, and they are looking to amend the proffers. It's also located within the Route 650 Design Overlay District, and there is a floodplain overlay district which is impactful to the site. It is located in the far southeastern portion of the county. Looking at the existing zoning, the property is zoned B1 with proffers. There is commercial zoning to the east. There's some industrial zoning to the west that's associated with West Creek Business Park, and there's residential to the south across Patterson Avenue. And the subject property is recommended for commercial use in the comprehensive plan. Look at the aerial photo. The site is undeveloped. But the main thing to notice that it's sort of an impact or part of the development of the site. The county does have a treatment facility that is located or it abuts this property to the east. This site and that pump station do share an access to Patterson Avenue. They will continue to share that access, so that will be a part of the site plan for the Cameron use, the Cameron application. This is a site plan that was submitted in 1998. The property was approved for 2 office buildings totaling about 180,000 square feet. The rectangles is sort of an approximation of where they're proposing to develop right now. So as you can see, they would sort of comparably replace one of those office buildings with their proposed senior living facility, and they would develop a portion of the site, and a portion of it would remain undeveloped. Kind of zooming into their site plan, just a couple things to note. It is one building. The parking is substantially broken up around the site, and there is the entrance there onto Patterson Avenue. There was a community meeting held in April. About 25 people attended. I would say there was no opposition to the request. There were a number of questions and concerns that were raised. Questions about the zoning and the proffers and how the proffers are handled, the overlay district. There was discussion about ensuring that they have quality building materials and architecture, and that they maintain the largest buffer they can. They retain all the trees in that buffer, minimizing lighting impacts. Project timelines, how long it was going to take the construction of the site to take place. Also a number of questions about the roads, including the potential for turn lanes, the idea of prohibiting left turn movements out of the site. And there is a signal that will be installed this calendar year at the West Creek intersection, which is just to the west of the site. Then also there is that residual land that would remain available for future development. Some of the details of their use: it is an independent senior living facility. Another term for that is sort of congregate housing, and congregate housing is typically housing that also has features like a common dining room, common service area for the residents. This project is not an assisted living facility. It does not provide nursing care or any related skilled care. They are proposing 130 units, which would be a combination of 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom units. As mentioned earlier, it is a one building, 3 stories tall, has about 140 parking spaces, plus the garages would be available for lease. They do provide a number of services, and including to providing meals. There's housekeeping, there's a theater on site, there's some retail service uses like the pharmacy and gift shop, concierge service, shuttle bus, and so forth. Some additional information that the applicant provided, that they consider full occupancy at about 150 to 170 guests. Their average age of the residents is about 80 years old, and many of the residents are either widowed or have lost ability to drive. Just a couple other notes about the site that I've mentioned previously. The county does have the pump station that abuts the property to the east, and they do share that common access. And looking at both the entire site and the proposed Cameron application, there's a substantial amount of floodplain on the site. They do propose to impact that floodplain, and that necessitates the CUP application that you will hear following this application. Staff did raise a couple of concerns with their proposal as presented. They did do they did do a turn lane warrant analysis, and their analysis demonstrated that they needed to provide a full left turn lane. There is a median break in Patterson Avenue in front of their site. There is no left turn lane there currently, and they would be providing that. They are committed to providing a right taper, sort of a deceleration lane for the westbound traffic. Staff did have a couple concerns with the analysis. It only looked at as it was presented to us, it only looked at the assisted living, or excuse me, the senior living facility. It didn't include any future development. It didn't include the pump station. So I think that would be a more complete analysis. And staff is supportive of doing some type of right turn lane in addition to the taper into the site. Also, they are providing to do a right turn only improvement, sort of put a concrete median in that would discourage or prohibit left-hand turning movements. Staff does oppose that improvement on this location for a number of reasons. Number one, it does not eliminate the turning movement. It simply moves the traffic to the west. So anyone that would want to head eastbound on Route 6 would have to travel westbound to the West Creek intersection, the West Creek Parkway intersection, which is a much busier intersection. And so that would now become a U-turn movement. Also, there is no evidence of any safety concern here at this time. Rivergate is across the street, and the DMV records show that there's one accident here at this location in the last 5 years. So would not be considered a dangerous intersection, and the senior living facility would be a low traffic generator anyway, so it should not be contributing, a significant amount of additional traffic to the intersection. Also, by forcing that traffic to head west, it just increases the traffic unnecessarily on westbound Patterson Avenue, and then that would be compounded by any future development or future site development. With the proposed left turn lane and the right turn taper or turn lane, there's going to be improvements to that area anyway, when they're complete, the geometry and engineering of that will be better than it is today anyway. So that's already going to be done. And also that would impact and make truck traffic. There's truck traffic that travels to the pump station, and that would make the movements of those trucks more difficult for those, which is related to either county trucks or trucks that are conducting county-related business. One other item, the county, it does have an Eastern Goochland Trail. It's also called the West Creek Trails. It's a significant amenity, long-term project that will essentially build a trail all the way from Patterson Avenue to Broad Street along an existing utility line. We do have a portion of this trail has been funded and is under construction right now, or under design for construction up near Broad Branch. A portion of this trail does traverse their site within the floodplain, and their site plan and the plans that don't acknowledge it. They don't provide access to it. They haven't provided any access agreements to it. So we would like some type of acknowledgement or commitment to this trail included as a part of their application. I mean, it is a long-term project, and it is going to get built in segments, and I think it's important for any property owners that are developing property to sort of participate and facilitate the construction of that trail. Looking at the proffers, I'll just go over a couple of the changes that are proposed. I've attempted to highlight them in yellow. The first two changes really are just added the home for the aged use to the proffers. As it relates to the exterior building materials, this rezoning approved in 1998 was actually approved prior to the overlay district. So we did request to remove any building materials that conflict with the overlay district. And also the parking lot lighting is already required by the code, so they did delete those. And also there are a couple of items you'll see as far as the rooftop mechanical equipment and the trash receptacles. Those were originally proffered to be reviewed at the time of development or plan of development, but the certificate of approval review is the appropriate time to review those changes. So we did request that they change the plan of development to certificate of approval. Similar for signage, same thing, prefer that to be reviewed with certificate of approval. And then the severance clause, that actually deletion occurred, does not in your packets. That is a change that occurred subsequent to your packets being published. But at the recommendation of the county attorney's office, we asked them to remove that. So staff is supportive of all of the proffer changes that they submitted with their application. Just in summary, generally staff is supportive of the application, but this application could be improved if they committed to the full left and right turn lane. If they did delete that right turn only restriction on traffic, because staff is opposed to that, and if they also included a commitment to the Eastern County trails by providing access agreements or otherwise facilitating the construction of that trail. And that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Mr. Cohen,
John?
How would you compare the anticipated community impact of this project to the previously proposed 2 office buildings? And you've already covered traffic.
Right.
Other things that affect the community.
Well, I think I think the traffic is a significant one because this is going to be a lower traffic generator. So not only does it generate less traffic, it generates traffic at a different time because the residents are not typically going to be generating traffic in the AM rush hour or the PM rush hour. So not only is it a less traffic generator, that less traffic generated is generated at a different time. Other uses, I mean, they're going to be comparable. I mean, those office buildings are multi-story office buildings. I think certainly with the overlay district being approved, that would add an extra level of review, especially if you're nearby residential areas. They would appreciate the fact that it has to go through that extra level of review to review the aesthetic concerns, lighting, signage, bill of materials, colors, and things like that, landscaping, buffers, in addition to whatever's in the proffers. They get that extra level of review. But I think, it's still, the office building, they were proposing 180,000 square foot buildings. This is a large 3-story building. So I think it's certainly different, but I don't know if that type of massive scale, hard for me to say that would be a significant difference for what was proposed.
A retirement community is probably not restricted to Goochland residents, so it may bring some new residents to the county. But then again, they're also made it perhaps so with the office buildings because that may bring employment.
Right.
So other people may come here. So the impact may be minimal.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's different. The traffic is the big one. I mean,
Okay.
They're both going to be added to the traffic to the tax rolls and diversify the county's base. So they're both going to be a benefit that way.
Okay. Thank you.
What do you mean by committing to a full left and right turn lane?
They have committed. They did a turn lane warrant analysis, and that analysis recommend a full left turn lane, which they are committed to.
No, that's leaving.
Pardon? No, that would be traveling towards Henrico County, traveling east in the median, allowing for a left turn into the site.
Okay.
Now,
There's already a left turn lane heading west.
Actually, there's a median break
Right.
currently, but there's no turn lane.
Right. Right. Heading west. There's already a
Right.
cut in there.
So heading east, turning left into their site. Oh, there's a turn lane from Rivergate, right? But not.
If you head west,
Sorry,
you turn into.
there's not a
through
turn
the
lane
Rivergate.
turning into the subject property.
Right.
But so that and their turn lane warrant analysis recommended a taper only, and basically sort of a deceleration lane heading into the site. And staff would prefer to see a full turn lane into that site. Even if the warrant analysis didn't require it, we think that would be a more appropriate improvement.
Yeah. If I could just follow up on what Tom mentioned. So as you're headed west on Patterson and you approach this site, there is a median break, but there is no left turn lane to get into the site.
Right, I think there is a left turn lane to turn into Rivergate,
I'm not
but there's
talking
no
about-
left turn lane to turn into this site.
Well, if you're headed east on Patterson, you've got to turn right to get to Rivergate,
Right, correct,
right?
correct.
And I'm talking about heading east on Patterson. As you approach this site, there is a median break, but there is no taper, there is no deceleration lane.
Correct.
And you're recommending there should be.
Well, they're going to build a turn lane there, so we're going to
Oh.
get that one.
Oh, so that's part of
That's
the plan,
Mhm.
which would be a deceleration lane that would allow you to turn into the median
Yeah,
break.
the deceleration lane is on their side of Patterson, heading westbound.
All right,
that-
well, I guess I'm confused. Once again, as you're headed west,
Actually, if you look, if you see to put to the point, if you're heading,
yeah,
this I believe is the median right here.
yes,
So if you're heading this way here,
Yes.
there is no turn lane into their property. So right here with this gray area, they would be installing a full left turn lane.
okay, all right.
Now they are proposing, you can sort of see that's the
I'm saying
taper,
median.
sort of a deceleration
That's all right.
I
lane,
got it.
and we would prefer to go ahead and
Make
see
it
a
a full
full
right.
turn lane there,
Instead of a little taper.
right at that location right
Okay.
there.
Right, that explains it.
One of the, this is not a assisted living community or anything like that, is it?
Correct, it is not
Okay, so
assisted living.
many of the residents will be driving, right?
Now, they said their average age of their residents is 80, and maybe they can speak to that better than I can, so I'm sort of repeating what they've said. And they said
I know a lot of 80-year-olds that are still driving. In fact, I
Well-
know one or two in their 90s that are still driving.
Like I say, these age-restricted type communities, whether they're senior living or assisted living or single-family detached, they do get a decreased parking and traffic generation requirements according to the traffic engineer. So that the Institute of Traffic Engineers says these communities of older residents generate less traffic.
Yeah,
I'm almost 80 myself.
and just to follow up to that, if I might, this is only a portion of the site, right?
Yes, correct.
This is 40 acre, what is the acreage that is to be developed?
Sorry, I can't answer that. Maybe the applicant can answer
Right,
that.
But the entire site is 40 acres?
Correct, about 39.
So if that's 40 acres, this looks like maybe,
Let's say it's approximately half the
Half of
developable
20.
acreage.
okay. So the remainder of the site could be developed for office buildings.
Correct,
So there could be additional traffic
correct.
because of that.
Yes, sir.
So, so would there be, right, so there would be another entrance, right, for that access?
They are allowed to have an additional right in, right out. They would be allowed to do that as long as they could meet our access management requirement. That's not a proposal. They're not proposing that, and we really haven't had any discussions with them about any future development of the site. We've really focused on what they're proposing here.
And so we would cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yes, sir.
On that site plan, where's the trail you're talking about?
The trail, it's within the floodplain, and the county has a utility easement. I don't believe the easement shows up on there. Excuse me for pointing to the screen again. But let's say more or less splits the property in half, approximately. Actually, it actually comes down from, it terminates at the pump station there. So it would go out through approximately through there. It is within the floodplain, so it's not on the developable
Right.
part.
Okay, any other questions for staff? All right, would the applicant like to come forward and speak to the proposal? Just state your name, if you would, and
My name is Charlie Baverman. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Dinsmore and Scholl. I also have with me my client, Bob Lewis, the Director of Development for Cameron General Contractors. Our project engineer, Kevin Deloy with Bowman Consulting, is here as well, and we'll both be available to answer any questions you may have. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Coleman, for your presentation as well. I do wish to make sure that all the commissioners understand that the application that we've made and the approval we are seeking here is simply for the addition of a home for the aged to our proffered conditions. As Mr. Coleman indicated, we have made proposals to amend certain of the other proffers at the request of staff to achieve conformity with the code. We're happy to do that, but the request is simply the use-based change to include a home for the aged, which is permitted use in the underlying district of B1. So with that, I'd like to introduce and bring up my Bob Lewis, again, the Director of Development with Cameron General Contractors.
Okay.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Bob Lewis with Cameron General Contractors, 7101 South 82nd Street, Lincoln, Nebraska. We were here in front of
Welcome
you
to
about a
Virginia.
year ago for a project up in West Creek, and we did not end up closing on that property, and so we're back in front of you today at this location. I'm not going to spend too much of your time. With respect to that, Tom made a good presentation about our community. Again, what we're looking to build here is a 130-unit independent living community. 128 of those will be rentable units. We have live-in managers in one of the units, and then we have a guest suite for visitors or people who live in other communities of our communities around the country that want to visit this area. Since I was last here a year ago, we've opened an additional 5 or 6 communities. We now operate 21 communities around the United States, and we have approximately 13 under construction and another 24 or 25 in the development stage, as this one is here. Again, a little background on Cameron General Contractors, 21 years of business out of Lincoln, Nebraska. We are the owner and the operator and the manager of all 21 communities. It is our intent to build this, own it, and operate it as part of our portfolio. Again, the average age of our residents is 80 years old. 50% of our residents don't own cars or drive, and that is based on surveys we do of our existing communities. So it is a very low traffic generator, no school impacts. It is a highly amenitized building. Tom mentioned a few of those things, the theater. We offer a single monthly rent that covers all of the amenities within the building, minus the third-party vendors that we'll bring in for the residents' use only, which is typical of these type of communities, which would be a salon, barber, potentially a bank, gift shop, pharmacy drop-off. Those are pretty typical for this type of community. 40% of this building will be commons areas for the residents. We offer 3 meals a day, valet parking, concierge service, shuttle bus, things of that nature. And with that, I'll end my presentation.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any questions here for the applicant?
If you don't mind, before we conclude our presentation, I would like to bring up Mr. Deloy, who can run through a few issues as to our site plan.
Good evening, everybody. Kevin Deloy, Bowman Consulting, West Deer Parkway, Henrico. I was asked to provide just a brief overview of the site plan that has been presented to you. We have incorporated a 3-story prototypical facility with a narrow footprint within the confines of the environmental constraints on the property. We've provided ample parking. We exceed actually the parking required in the code. And a number of revisions were made to the site plan after our community meeting, and that's what I want to highlight for you this evening. The proffers call for a 50-foot landscape buffer from Patterson Avenue. We made some revisions following the community meeting and heard the desire for more screening and buffering and making sure that the view from Patterson Ave is as least as possible to see the facility. So we changed the parking layout, moved some parking to the back and what have you. We've added a retaining wall at the front of the site, and we're looking to increase the vegetative buffer from 50 feet to 75 feet. And along those lines, we also modified the driveway design going into the site to provide a median so that we could put trees along that median. And where that opening, that will be the one opening into the site, the trees in the median will added protection to block the view of the facility from the road. And like I said, with the parking revisions, we increased the parking setback from 75 feet to about 100 feet. That's 25 feet more than what was proffered. The right turn out only from the driveway was provided as a result of the concerns and the request of those at the community meetings. So we're very flexible. Again, as Mr. Coleman indicated, this is a very, very low traffic generator, ideal in that case, particularly around peak hours. So our flexibility allowed us to try to provide that to the residents. I will point out that we do need to go through the POD process. VDOT, this is a VDOT state maintained road, so any final design will certainly be subject to VDOT approval, including the turn lanes and the tapers. But we're flexible in those regards. We did provide the turn lane on the eastbound lanes, full left turn into the site, as Tom Coleman indicated, and the taper, which was warranted for this use, on the right turn westbound into the site. We did not submit an alternative analysis that we also did, but we could, and we're willing to. We looked at what happens if something down the road was built on the other side of the property as well. We didn't look at an 80,000 square foot office building because we felt that's unrealistic, but we looked at a small assisted living memory care, perhaps a small medical office building, or a small general office building. And in those scenarios, it still only required the taper. We, again, are flexible with respect to what we can do with respect to the off-site road improvements. The reason why a full turn lane and taper was not provided was doing so would require more construction along Patterson when it wasn't warranted. That would be taking out more trees. It seemed contradictory to what the neighbors were asking. So we could provide the 200-foot taper, we could provide a 100-foot taper, 100-foot turn lane, which would be better than the 200-foot taper. What we are willing and would be required to do is to work out those turn lane improvements with VDOT at POD. They will be a part of that process. So even proffering those, which I believe my client would be willing to do, could pose, VDOT could change at POD approval.
Okay, thank you. Are we headed up to 10 minutes here?
Just to
Yes,
give you a couple of final talking points before we conclude our presentation, I want to highlight a few items for you. This project will generate about $25 million construction value. It's going to generate a significant tax base for the community here. There was a question about the potential tax impact of an office building earlier, but in the 20 years since the prior approval, that has not happened. This is a project that is going to get off the ground and be producing tax revenues for the county very, very soon. As Kevin mentioned, the visual impact of this project is going to is less than what the originally approved project would have resulted in. It's a low traffic generator. There's no impact on the school system, given the demographics of the residents. It's a use that does not exist in the county. This is going to provide a new option for residents in this area to live in as they age. And we, in our experience, it's been a very beneficial option for older residents of any community. And finally, we have been working extensively with the homeowners across the street and the Rivergate Homeowners Association and they have issued a formal letter in support of our project. I know you're going to be hearing from a representative of their community in the public portion of this hearing, and they'll speak more to that. But we have made significant efforts to work with the residents and done so to the extent that we've obtained their support. So with that, I'd just like to thank you again and request respectfully that you recommend our Proffers Amendment application for approval.
Good, thank you.
For the applicant.
Yeah, any questions for the applicant?
I have a question. I don't know that I heard it, but the addressing the eastbound trail for the county, working with the county.
That is certainly something that we are open to. We have not received much in the way of detail as to what the request specifically would be, but conceptually we're not opposed to it. Things in terms of perhaps the nature of what we would be asked to, are we being asked to install versus just grant rights to install the trail would be an issue. What materials would be used, the width of the area, those things. Conceptually, we're open to it. If we have more detail, we could comment more specifically.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to open the public comment period. Is anyone here who would like to speak in favor or in opposition to this application? I see a gentleman in the rear. Please come forward, give us your name and address. And I understand that you are speaking for a group, Mr. Spence?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Then you will be given additional time as you require.
Thank you. My name is Roger Spence. I reside at 13275 Kellington Lane. That's in the Rivergate subdivision. As you've heard, we are the neighborhood directly across from the proposed project, and we would share the same intersection. I would tell you that the reason I'm the only one here tonight, until 48 hours ago, we thought we had total agreement on this project. So I'm speaking on behalf of the neighborhood, but I would like to segment my comments into two areas: the general project, and then I'd like to address the right-hand turn lane. As Charlie mentioned, we have worked very extensively with the developer for the last couple of months. It's been an excellent process in working with them, and they've agreed to a number of requests that we've made. I'd just like to mention them very quickly. A deceleration lane on Patterson westbound, a left turn lane and median modification on Patterson eastbound, a right turn only exit onto Patterson westbound, a number of revised setbacks. We requested, as mentioned, we were concerned about the appearance of a structure very close to Patterson right across from our entrance. So they agreed to the first 50 feet, all trees 5 inches in caliper to be retained. The next 25 feet, no construction, and the addition of landscape A level. 150 feet would be the closest corner to Patterson with a 100-foot setback of the parking lot. A divided entrance with 6-inch tree-lined landscape island, which is very similar to the entrance we have to Rivergate across the street. And they agreed to allow the ACC, which is the Architectural Control Committee, which I failed to mention, I'm the chairman of the Architectural Control Committee and a former board member. Our president is in Europe tonight and couldn't be here. So they have agreed to allow the ACC to consult with them in the selection of materials to be used on the building. So that's excellent. There were a couple things that they did not necessarily agree with. One is we asked them to remove the multi-story office building from permitted uses, and they've agreed to restrictions on that eastern portion of the site that would limit development to a structure that would be in similar height, but not necessarily eliminate the opportunity to sell the property for an office building to be constructed. They would maintain the same setbacks and landscape restrictions as on the senior living project, and agree to use the common driveway for that potential future use. So the living center, the waste treatment facility, and any future development all would use that common driveway, which would dump into Patterson and face our street. So we, as I said earlier, we have been pleased with working with Charlie and the group, and our intention when we came here tonight was to fully support this proposal. However, the right turn lane is almost a showstopper for us, and I want to address that. As I said before, if we had known that the county was going to oppose the right-hand turn lane, this auditorium would be filled with Rivergate residents tonight, because traffic safety is a serious issue for us. Let me tell you a couple reasons why we believe, and the developer had originally concurred with us, that a right turn only lane was necessary in that location. If you look at the developer's website, they will tell you that they seek property with access to well-traveled streets and walkways. Route 6 Patterson Avenue in this location has no walkways, and it's not a street. It's a busy 55 mile per hour highway with speeds that often exceed 60 miles an hour en route to 288. 50 to 60% of Cameron's residents drive cars. And it's not assisted living, it's not a nursing home, so they have free use of their vehicles whenever they choose to. In fact, this organization actually even provides garages for the residents to park their cars. So potentially we have 50 to 60% of their occupants driving cars. They will tell you that they market only to people 75 years old and older, and the average age is in the early 80s. So we have a fairly old population driving vehicles on a very busy highway. Unlike Cedarfield and Westminster, Canterbury, and Lakewood Manor and other senior facilities in the area that allow their residents to own and operate vehicles, this project is not on a 35 mile per hour street, it's not in a suburban area, and it doesn't have a traffic light. So it's at an uncontrolled intersection on a very busy highway. The median on this stretch of Patterson is very narrow, as I think most of you know. And I want to just demonstrate the primary issue that we have in this location, and we have that in Rivergate. It has become so dangerous trying to make a left-hand turn onto Patterson Avenue that we do one of two things. Those of us who live closer to Patterson make a right-hand turn, and we go down to CFB Bank, do a U-turn, and come back. The residents who live closer to River Road will exit the River Road gate, go down to Blair Road, come up to Blair to the stoplight, and turn left. Because here's the problem with that area of Patterson Avenue. If you assume this is the median, and the median is slightly wider than the average vehicle. So if you have to make a left-hand turn lane, let's say you're an 82-year-old coming out of the senior living center, you're going to make a left-hand turn to go eastbound on Patterson to go to the Food Lion. You must first cross 2 lanes of 55 mile per hour to 60 mile an hour traffic heading westbound toward 288. Then you approach a median, which is only about half as wide as your car. So you can't stop because you could get blindsided from the rear. You can't straddle it in the middle. You can't move forward. So you must commit when you leave the living center to cross 2 lanes of 55 mile per hour traffic, cross a median about half the width of your car, immediately turn left, and accelerate to 55 miles an hour pretty quickly to merge with the traffic heading in the other direction. Those of us who frequent that intersection trying to turn left have found that's almost impossible, because in our case we have a hill coming from Hope Church. So the traffic coming down toward eastbound, we have only a few seconds to see it. The traffic coming from West Briar Lane and Henrico, we have a hard time telling which lane it's in. So frankly, you know, for those of us who are much younger than 82, the only choice is to turn right, do a U-turn, and come back, or potentially get creamed. Because if you pull your car out to the beginning of the median and stop or hesitate to even look, almost half of your car is in the passing lane of those headed toward 288. So while staff thinks it's not necessary to have a right turn lane only, it's going to be fatal for some of these people, because they will come out, they may hesitate, they may stop to look, and particularly during some periods of the day, certainly at rush hour, but other periods, you can have 4 lanes of traffic occupied. 2 people in this way, 2 people in this way, and if you have a vehicle straddling the median and part of the car is hanging out, the guy in the passing lane has no choice but to hit you. And I describe that as a fatal accident. So again, our major issue is that the right-hand turn lane is a protection primarily for these older residents who will need to get out, 60% of them driving a car. It allows them to merge into Patterson, go down to Hope Church or to Blair Road, and do a safe U-turn to come back to the facilities that they will want to access. Now let me address the Hope Church light, because staff has suggested that Hope Church light might be a solution. I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. The only light between Lauderdale and Hope, and the only light is at Lauderdale. So the traffic coming past the senior living setting will be going 55 to 60 miles an hour as they approach the traffic light at Hope Church. Now the Hope Church will probably be a demand light, meaning it will get triggered by church traffic leaving at various times of the day, or it may get triggered by office traffic leaving at 5 o'clock in the evening from West Creek. I doubt it will be a light which every 2 minutes is trickling on and off, on and off, and on and off. So the people at the Senior Living Center who want to turn left, even if they get a break in the westbound traffic, it's not likely that they're going to have a lot of traffic stopped up at Hope Church to give them an opening every 3 or 4 minutes to head east on Patterson Avenue. So, as I've told Charlie, and we thought we had full agreement on this in the last 3 or 4 months, and there's no one here from Rivergate but me, because we assumed that we had full agreement on all of the landscaping, the aesthetic issues, and the traffic issues that would not only protect us, because we have to use that intersection as well, but primarily protect people who are up in years and are probably not used to, entering a highway with that rate of speed. As I said before, most of the other senior centers in this area are in suburban neighborhoods with 25, 35 mile per hour speed limits. That's not what this is. Route 6 Patterson Avenue, which used to be a fairly rural route toward Goochland, is now a very busy, often dangerous 55 to 65 mile an hour speedway. So gentlemen, I encourage you to not accept the staff's recommendation on the right-hand turn and to allow that to be part of the plan that goes to the Board of Supervisors. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure I can guarantee you a 10-hour Board of Supervisors meeting in July, because we will be here en masse.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. Thank you. Before you leave the podium, do we have any questions for the applicant?
Well, I'm assuming that he's proposing a prohibition on left turns out of the retirement center.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I have a question as well. We're talking about only half of the residents, 60% driving cars, and not driving at busy times, most of them. However, we have people that work there.
Right.
There are staff that'll be coming in and out, and I assume that many of them will be working at, I'm not making your case for you here, I'm just questioning whether or not that's been brought into the equation.
They would have to do exactly the same
thing. So
thing.
they'd have to do the same
Sure.
thing, and they
we all
might
would,
well
yeah.
be traveling at peak rush hour, peak hours.
And John, it's not only an issue at peak rush hours. If you sat at our intersection, the problem is visibility. You literally can't tell. If I'm trying to turn left from Rivergate going toward 288, I literally can't tell which lane those cars are coming from CFB Bank. And coming in the other direction, they come over that hill from Hope Church doing 60 miles an hour. And we've had people that have had near misses because they get out there and then they kind of get trapped. So it is not it's not a traffic engineering issue. It is a traffic safety issue, and it's a serious one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor or in opposition of this application? Seeing none, we will close the public comment period. Are there any further comments from staff?
Would staff mind just restating their position on this case again, if you don't mind, with recommendations?
Yeah, no, I think, as I mentioned, staff, we're supportive of the zoning change. I think with the concerns we have, we do think this application could be improved. Like with their if they committed to the full right turn lane, I think that would improve the case. If they deleted the right turn only at the exit, that would improve the case. And if they were to address these trails, so they certainly could do things to improve the application, but we're generally supportive of the change to the proffers that they're proposing.
I have a question. Okay, the full left turn lane, I thought that was already in the application.
Yeah, they are committed to the full turn lane.
All right, how about, and the full right turn lane?
It's really more fully committing to the right turn lane. Right now, they're only committed to the taper for the right, a right taper.
Isn't that adequate, Tom? Or when you say, what's the difference between a taper or a deceleration lane and a full turn lane?
Well, typically that when you talk about that storage, you're actually allowing for that opportunity for that car to be completely, it's going to be full 12 feet wide. If you're sort of familiar with the deceleration lanes, those tapers, the car might be slowing down, but it's going to be in the right of way while it's on the taper. So I think we have a preference for access management. We typically are recommending the left turn lanes and right turn lanes, and we would just prefer a right turn lane there. And we can have discussions with them on how large that is, but we would prefer a right turn lane with some storage there rather than having taper for the whole way.
Okay. One other question. There's been talk about the landscaping, the increased buffer, and the parking and building setbacks, et cetera. Of course, the site is in the entrance corridor overlay district, which has very specific buffering, landscaping, setback requirements. Is this application in compliance with the overlay district?
Well, we haven't fully reviewed it for compliance with that. Certainly, we're not aware of any conflicts. I mean, when we talk about improvements within the right-of-way, any of their overlay district requirements would be outside of the right-of-way. But I think as we've envisioned this application so far, we're not aware of any conflicts. But they also have, they're going to have to submit a significant additional detail for us to review, building materials, landscaping, and so forth.
I understand. Any other questions? John?
Yeah, well, I'm confused. Right here, you said the application could be improved by delete right turn only restriction for traffic exiting site. I thought the gentleman's argument just now was in favor of a right turn only out of this site.
The gentleman is in favor of it. Staff is opposed to it.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions for staff?
Well, I'm hung up on that same issue. It's a narrow turn lane, and I've tried to turn on it. And I don't understand why staff is so much against it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be responsible for an 80-year-old getting T-boned by a truck coming from Luckstone carrying 20 tons of gravel and being spread out all over the highway. I think it's a dangerous situation, and I don't know why they're opposed to it. If there's so little traffic coming in and out, I mean, to do a home run from the driveway all the way across the traffic heading east is I think, dangerous for people that are elderly. Their eyesight and their hearing is not great. I think it's a dangerous situation for us to consider even allowing something like that. I mean, I wouldn't want that on my shoulders.
Yeah, I have the same concern.
But if we approve it with the right turn only restriction, the staff still can come back and make them delete it and allow a left turn?
There will be continued review and discussion of that.
We don't get it again, though.
Pardon?
We won't get it again to review it.
Yeah. And Ms. Hunter, you certainly come forward.
Good evening, Joanne Hunter. It's important to note we're talking specifically on this case with the home for the age, but that's only half the property. There's 3 uses that would be using this entrance. It's the home for the age, the pump station with trucks and trailers, and also the future office development. And where you have medium breaks is where VDOT has designated where there should be left turn movements. If it didn't have a median break, that's where you would have a right in, right out. It's very unusual to not have a left turn movement when you have a median break, because that's where VDOT determined where it's safe and appropriate to have one.
Well, I think that's okay if you go further west, where you've got a median that's 30 or 40 feet wide. This is.
And this one, the median will be wider because they'll be making improvements by adding that left turn lane. They will be making changes to that median.
So they're going to widen Patterson Avenue.
They will be adding a left turn lane at that median.
But that's going to take up the existing median. It's there.
It'll widen it, and there'll be now a place for that car
How are
to
they
sit
gonna
in the
widen it
middle.
without
Do they
having to
cut out the
spread
median for it?
Patterson out some more?
Yes.
You can't
Yes.
make it wider.
They will be making the median wider, and they will be adding a turn lane there, so the car would be sitting in a lane now. It
Right.
wouldn't be
So
hanging
they're gonna
out.
actually have to widen Patterson at that point. The 4 lanes will have to spread out to allow them to put that up.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's-
So, Joanne,
go.
before you step down, because I think we missed that earlier.
Debbie Bird can also
Good.
probably
Can we
speak
talk
to
about-
it.
So are we actually looking at widening Patterson Avenue?
The turn lane itself, the median is not gonna widen itself, but the median brakes are actually sized a long enough length so that, as the gentleman was explaining, if this is your median and the car may sit here, you're actually, when you make that turning movement, the car really sits like this. I mean, that's the appropriate turning movement for that, is you should never be there
Right.
90 degrees. You're supposed to pull out and be ready to merge in. It is a narrower median than in some other places further out Patterson, that's correct. But again, VDOT will also be reviewing this. They will be commenting on this, and Joanne is correct in her statement that the median brakes are specifically designed to meet sight distances. They look at where the hills are, how far you can see. That's the way they're designed and where they're placed.
So,
Matt?
so we could see if we had both full right and left turn lanes, not having the deleted right turn, or deleting the right turn only as staff has recommended, so having a full intersection. VDOT coming back and saying to the applicant they need more property to
They absolutely could.
make Patterson wider to make it fit into the more modern
Correct.
safety, sight distance, all that good stuff.
Yeah,
Right?
and that is one, when we get to the rezoning phase at that point, VDOT has not had the ability to fully review everything because it's too early. A lot of the specifics aren't completely nailed down. We don't have all the specifics. At this point, it's really, as much as their site plan really has pretty much laid out, for the rezoning, it's typically looked at as a conceptual site plan because we do know that these things may change once we get to the POD and the other agencies weigh in.
And the ask from the county to the applicant for the eastern trail is just for the trail easement. And obviously there's things to be considered between the applicant or the landowner and the
Yeah,
county.
and that is absolutely something that between now and the board meeting, we will be working with them and can
Okay.
provide them information so that they feel more comfortable with that.
Yeah,
And
that's
we will
Right.
be
I
discussing
think
that.
that's doable.
I'm good.
Are you done?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Zuri. Would the applicant like to respond to any of this discussion? Either the engineer, the lawyer, or the or the boss?
I will add that on top of what Ms. Bird has indicated, that we do have a lot of work to do with VDOT. The points being made about the location of the median break, access management, VDOT guidelines, will all be reviewed with VDOT. One thing that I am going to consider discussing with VDOT and staff, if it comes to having to provide a left turn out of the site eastbound into the city, perhaps it could be signed that during peak hours, no left turn out. That's one way to possibly address that. And additional striping improvements to address safety and what have you for turns leftbound east or west. Those will be details worked out with VDOT during a detailed design review during the POD process. We will need to pull a VDOT land use permit to make any improvements, and that's not going to happen without their approval.
Good, thank you. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to address the last item on the trail. We look forward to working with the county on the trail. We would not oppose easements. We feel that's a great benefit for not only the county but for our residents. So we will work with staff to come to an agreement on the trail issue.
Thank you. Okay, gentlemen, any further Comments or questions? Mr. Rocky Charlie, would you like to summarize where we are?
I think we agree with all the easements and the right-of-ways and including the trail in it, and especially the setbacks and what they're doing with the landscaping. I'm still not real happy with this right turn lane, but I assume that I would urge the engineers and the subdevelopment at Rivergate to work together on that, because I think Rivergate has probably more experience on that than anybody sitting downtown in VDOT's office. You know, and I would hate to think they would do something where it could be easily corrected with a no left turn sign and endanger citizens of this particular community, because that could be a real detriment. And you know, we're on public record as being opposed to that. I think it would be a shame for somebody to be injured in doing that, and I just don't think there's enough space there to allow that, especially with the demonstration that Mr. Spence did. So that's my only comment.
Good. Thank you. Anyone else have any? Mr. Duke?
I mean, I agree with Mr. Rockacharlie, but I think that a full left and right would be, I guess, more appropriate, providing the size is the space is adequate with VDOT. So that's my thought on that, is to have the full left and right turn lane.
But VDOT they're going to have the final say on,
right.
on that. They're going to say that yes, it's safe. Yes, what we're installing is safe.
You need to
Well, I think we need to get. Yeah, I think we need to get to that, and that was going to be the point that I was going to make. It isn't really our practice to kick the can down the road, although on occasion we have had a difference of opinion about cases that we defer to the board. But in this case, obviously there is a lot of public sentiment. The residents, and as Mr. Rockacharlie pointed out, the concerns are valid. I think the applicant is willing to go either way with this situation, so he's willing to work with us. It's a positive addition for the county, I think, in every way, as I approach that range of age. So it's certainly, I think, a very positive addition potential for the county in every respect. This traffic issue must be resolved. So if I could ask the staff, would it be appropriate for us to, or maybe Whit, you could help me here, would it be appropriate, if the commission is agreeable, to move the case forward to the board pending a full review of the traffic issue with VDOT and seeking an agreement as to the right way to handle this? Is that an appropriate action?
I would say if you would like for them to come back, you could say that you hope that they work on those, but I would either defer it or make a decision. You have to make a decision based on what's presented tonight. So if you want additional evidence, if you need that additional traffic information,
or we could,
because you wouldn't see it again, I'm not sure how that would.
Yeah, or we could recommend approval with that condition, modifying that element.
Well,
or not. So, Tom?
They have proposed, if I read it correctly, a right turn only in their application.
The proffer currently is
right turn
only,
so
and staff is recommending that the planning commission not recommend acceptance of that condition.
Oh, there's no problem?
Oh. No,
But the
site
design
plan
shows right turn only.
Correct. The site plan is not proffered, but that's what they've publicly demonstrated they propose to build. Okay. So then they continue to support that.
So there isn't anything with regard to that in the resolution.
So as presented, there is a right turn only exit. And that's what we would be approving or disapproving.
Your approval would be limited to what is in the actual proffers.
Right.
So while they have presented this plan, this site plan as a conceptual plan showing that, as staff previously mentioned, that can be changed. That wouldn't be anything set in stone, right or left turn, or both, or one or not the other. So it wouldn't be, that wouldn't be reflected in your recommendation for approval or denial.
So what we must act on is the application as presented with a right turn only access.
If you choose, what you're acting on is solely the proffers. That's not implicated in the resolution.
So that is not a proffer.
Correct.
Therefore, what's before the commission does not include the right turn only
Correct.
lane.
It's the proffers that were included in your packet. This is what the planning commission is being
And I believe
requested
staff
to.
already said they were supportive of those. Most of those changes were requested by staff, and then their main change is to add the home for the aged use.
All right, let me make sure I understand this. So what we are charged to act on is the application for the proffer amendments that do not include a right turn only lane out of the site.
That is correct.
It's not included.
Correct. The project you would eventually see based on these proffers may or may not look like that drawing and may or may not have entrances, so long as they're in compliance with both overlay districts, the zoning, and these additional restrictions.
Right.
They can do the office use or the home for the aged or anything that meets all of those requirements.
So if we move the recommendation forward to the board, approve the recommendation, the issue of the right turn lane out of the site would still be on the table.
It'll still be a concern of staff's. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. And the applicant may or may not choose to amend their proffers with regard to that. It's solely up to the applicant.
I think one thing that may be confusing a little bit is most of the rezonings that come to you do have a conceptual plan proffered.
Right.
This one doesn't. So that is a little different tweak, that you're seeing a plan, but that's not actually what's being proffered.
That's what I was trying to get my arms
What's being
around.
proffered is just the conditions. They've shown you the plan. We're all in agreement with what it shows and what's going. So I think that's leading to this confusion, but.
Right. So we could act on this case favorably with the admonition that we have grave concern about the exit traffic from the site.
Ingress and egress.
Ingress and egress.
Yes, sir. We can certainly modify the resolution to reflect something along those lines should the commission wish it.
Indeed. Tom, would you like to pick up the ball?
One other question.
Sure.
Do we have a clue why staff is so adamant about allowing the left turn lane? Is it because of the pump station or what?
Staff?
Like I said, there were a couple of reasons. Number one, staff's position is they're not eliminating the turning movement. They're moving the turning movement from in front of their development. They're just moving it down the road. So that turning movement will still exist. It will now become a U-turn movement at West Creek Parkway. So therefore, from a traffic standpoint, there's no advantage to doing it. And they had some of those. There was no, while we're talking about safety, I mean, anytime there's new development, anytime there's a new conflict point, there's going to be the potential for accidents. That goes hand in hand with new development. So no one can talk to any intersection, future or existing, say there's not going to be any accidents there. What we need to do is try to make the entire roadway network as safe as possible. We do not believe moving these turning movements from the front of this development further down the road does not make the roadway more network, but the roadway network safer. There has been no study. The applicant did not bring anything forward to say that this development would make the road more unsafe. So it doesn't necessitate that movement. You know, those are a part of when we're talking about safety. It also increases traffic on Patterson Avenue. There now will be new traffic on westbound Patterson Avenue for a small amount of distance that otherwise wouldn't have to be there. That's unnecessarily adding traffic to westbound Patterson Avenue. They're also, we're talking about adding tapers and left turn improvements. When those things, when those are incorporated into the right-of-way, into the construction, it will be a better roadway. It will be more able to handle the traffic and better able to handle the turning movements. And also, as we alluded to earlier, this proposed use is only one of the users of that roadway. This would also restrict county traffic that utilizes that, including truck movement. So I think if you take all those together, staff is clear in that we do not believe that right turn movement is necessary or beneficial to the roadway network.
All right. Tom, would you like to?
Yeah, I move that we approve this, and hopefully we'll get another crack at it when we get the site development plan.
No, we won't.
We won't.
Yeah, no, we won't.
We're just approving it. Well, that's right, we
We
don't.
won't. Well, the BOS will.
We can approve it with grave concern
All right.
for the staff and VDOT and the board to deal with.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we disagree with the staff recommendation
Okay.
about the eliminating that left
I
turn.
second it.
All right.
I would just like to add, that just the concern for the intersection, and then for the applicant to work with the county on the trail easement, the eastbound trail.
All right, as I understand the motion that is before us, which has been moved and seconded, is that we are recommending approval of the application as submitted, expressing grave concern about the ingress and egress to the development, and would recommend that issue be taken up by the staff and VDOT as the plan of development is put together. Whit, can you put that together? Does that make sense? All right, so that motion as amended, are we okay with that, Tom? I think Tom made the motion. John seconded it.
Yeah.
So that amended motion is before us. Any further discussion?
Consideration of the trail easement, if that can be added to it.
Yeah, I think
Sorry.
that's, yeah,
So just
and
to
I think
confirm
we
that
should add that, of course.
Trail, grave concerns with regard to left turning out of the site.
Right.
Encouragement for staff, VDOT and the applicant to work together.
Correct. Right. And reach agreement as well on the eastern trail access, which is a very favorable thing. If I could quickly summarize before we vote on this, again, I think this is a very positive project for the county. I've been quite impressed with this organization. They're obviously very successful. I think to develop and manage a site is a very favorable thing. I think it brings good things to the county. So all that said, the motion as amended is before us. All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is carried and the recommendation will go forward to the board. Next case, Ms. Worling.
Mr. Chairman, CU 2018-5, it's an application filed by Cameron General Contractors requesting a conditional use permit to construct roadways and stormwater facilities within the flood fringe portion of the 100-year floodplain area at 12330 Patterson Avenue on tax map 64174A. The property is zoned B1 with proffers and is within the floodplain district and dam break inundation zone overlay district. The CUP is required by Article 20, 11.3, and 11.14, and the comprehensive plan designates this area as commercial.
Members of the Commission, Debbie Bird, Assistant Director of Community Development. This is a conditional use application for Cameron General Contractors to construct some roadways and other facilities within the flood fringe portion of the 100-year floodplain. It's the same site that we just discussed. The zoning map here is a little different than what Tom showed, and if I can point out a few things, it is B1 with proffers. What we're also seeing on here is, you'll note,
There you go.
okay, sorry. In the gray shaded area up here is the flood zone, which is what we were dealing with in this conditional use application. There's also the overlay, which is the yellow shaded portion down here. So the site has a lot of controls on it. Aerial photograph shows, again, the site. I got finger problems here. The creek is down here, so of course the floodplain down in here, and you can see in the site, a lot of this has been graded previously in preparation of a site development, and they're adhering to that on this site plan. This is the site plan sort of taken out a little bit from what Tom showed you. And in this, there's 3 areas where they're going to do a little fill. And if you look on this map, there's a couple things I'll point out. The blue line here is the actual limits of the 100-year floodplain. When you look at the 100-year floodplain, it's actually broken down into 2 sections. There's the floodway area, which is the area that's in the main channel of the floodplain, which under the flood regulations is an area designated of no development at all. The red line there represents the limits of that floodway line. So everything between the floodway line and the limits of the 100-year floodplain is what they call the flood fringe area. And the flood requirements and our county code allow, under certain conditions, there to be things that happen in that area. In this case, what the applicant is requesting is to place fill. The 3 areas that in particular he's going to do, I'll blow in a little bit so you can see, is a little area here, which may be used for a stormwater facility to be done. He's going to connect to the sanitary sewer, so there may be some fill in that area related to that. And then in this area, the roadway that goes around the project and to get to the parking area and have access, there'll be a little bit of fill in that area too. So those are the 3 areas that he's looking to impact on this project. This is a companion.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Certainly.
Are we talking mitigation required for these areas? That's not the issue.
No, that is not required under the flood regulations.
Okay.
They are allowed to fill in the flood fringe an unlimited amount. It's a companion request to the rezoning that you just heard. The CUP is required by Article 20, Section 11.3 and 11.14 of the zoning ordinance, which is part of the floodplain overlay. Once these improvements are constructed, the applicant is then allowed to ask for a letter of map amendment for fill from FEMA. Once that LOMAR is approved, that will then allow FEMA to take those filled areas outside of the flood district completely. And at that point, when that happens, the CUP's need for it will no longer be needed, and it essentially go away.
Right.
He needs to do the CUP now rather than do the fill and then go forward, because he can't get the LOMAR from FEMA until the fill is actually placed and the improvements done. So this is the process he has to go through, and it requires him to go through this CUP process under our code to allow the fill to be placed there. Community meeting, there's about 25 citizens there. There were no questions or any concerns in regard to any impacts to the floodplain. So when we look at the CUP conditions, the only condition is that the conceptual plan, and in this case we are attaching the plan, the improvements within and abutting that flood and fringe area of the 100-year floodplain shall generally conform to the conceptual plan, and that is the only condition that will be attached to this conditional use. It's the end of my presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Gentlemen, any questions for staff? I have one, Ms. Bird. Either the engineer or the attorney mentioned there's a retaining wall as part of this plan.
That is in the.
Where is that located?
I'll show you.
Property.
Oh, that's along the front of the property?
Yeah, that is out in here. I'm sorry, Mr. Rock, shall I keep hitting you in the head?
So that's not related to the
No.
wetland,
Is that correct, Kevin?
the floodplain? All right.
This
So
is
that's
not
already
wetlands,
outside.
this is floodplain.
Excuse me?
Where, this is not wetland.
Fringe.
It's
There
just
are
floodplain.
wetlands on the site too. There's some wetlands that come up in here, but they are not impacting any of the wetlands
Okay, so they're not being
on the site.
disturbed.
No.
And that's why mitigation is not required
Yes, sir.
of that, I understand. Carter, anything else?
No.
All right, as the county's technical expert in these areas, are you comfortable with what's being proposed here?
Yes, sir.
Good. Any other questions? Thank you. Would the applicant like to come forward?
Kevin Malloy, Coleman Consulting, West Deer Parkway, Henrico. I will only add that again, the sanitary sewer that the county built behind the site, one of the fill areas is to reach that sanitary sewer through the floodplain, and that's an opportunity for the trail connection.
I'm sorry, that's an opportunity.
That's an opportunity for the trail connection.
For the trail to connect.
Okay.
Got it,
Correct,
good.
correct.
Good point. Thank you. We'll open a public comment period. Would anyone like to speak in favor or in opposition to this conditional use permit application? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period. Since there were no public comment, I guess there's no rebuttal required or necessary by the applicant. Any further comments by staff? Any further questions or discussion among the commission? What's your pleasure?
I move we approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the CUP application. Any further discussion? All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Application is recommended for approval. Ms. Worley?
Mr. Chairman, your last public hearing this evening is an ordinance amendment. It's an ordinance to amend the Goochland County zoning regarding transient occupancy uses to allow bed and breakfasts and short-term rentals that meet certain design standards by right in the A1 and A2 districts. It's to allow country inns as a conditional use permit in A1 and A2, to allow transient occupancy uses with a conditional use in A1 and A2, residential rural, residential preservation, residential limited, residential general, residential neighborhood, and RO, and RPUD districts. To add design standards and registry requirements for transient occupancy uses, to amend the definition of bed and breakfast, and to add definitions for country inn, short-term rental hosted, and short-term rental unhosted.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Joanne Hunter, Director of Community Development. As Ms. Worley indicated, this is an ordinance amendment that deals with transient lodging in the county. The purpose of the ordinance amendment is to clarify and address how and where transient lodging should be permitted in the county. Transient lodging is defined as anything that's 30 days or less. So these ordinance amendments would not impact anybody who was having a long-term roommate or some long-term rental situation. This is really just for the short-term, 30 days or less. They're typically more like weekend type events, but anything 30 days or less would be impacted by this ordinance. So to give you some background, the county had previously been treating all transient lodging situations, including short-term rentals, as bed and breakfasts. So our code is 50 years old, and we didn't anticipate short-term rentals 50 years ago. So bed and breakfast was the only term in our ordinance that was dealing with transient lodging. So I think Mr. Roccacciarli pointed it out earlier with the Mrs. Pond's case, and it's a bed and breakfast, and is she serving a breakfast? Well, no. So there was some confusion as we were trying to make it fit, but it really didn't fit. So the board asked us to go ahead and look at transient lodging as a whole comprehensive instead of trying to shoehorn it into our existing code. So short-term rentals, I think, you got a little bit of education earlier tonight with the Ponds case, but they're commonly referred as the Airbnbs because that's the most popular of the booking sites. It's part of this new sharing economy where a homeowner can rent either a room out of their home or their entire home for fewer than 30 days. There's many different ways you can do it. They're all typically done online, but there's many different platforms, Airbnb, VRBO, which the two that Ms. Pond uses. There's Flip, HomeAway, Evolve, but they're all the similar model. You go online, you can look for a property and rent right through there. So we did think that transient lodging was only addressed in the bed and breakfast definition. Then as we were going through our home occupation definition, we found that there was also a term in that home occupation definition that referenced the rental of rooms to tourists. So we said, well, that's different than what we've been telling everybody. So we came back and we brought an ordinance amendment back to the board and through the Planning Commission to delete that term from the home occupation. At that time, when the board said, okay, let's stop doing Band-Aids, let's look at the transient lodging as a whole and in a comprehensive manner. So that's what this amendment will do. So in May, the board did delete that provision from the home occupation So right now, the only transient lodging in the ordinance is that bed and breakfast term. So what this amendment would do, there's 4 things that it set out to do. It provides 4 new definitions dealing with the different types of transient lodging. It establishes in what districts these uses would be permitted. Some are going to be proposed as by right uses, and some of them are going to be CUP uses. The ones that are by right, we've provided development standards for those, and then for the by right ones, we've also established a registration requirement. So the first thing I want to go over with you is the 4 new definitions. They're going to be bed and breakfast, country inn, short-term rental hosted, and short-term rental unhosted. So the big difference and the why you have the 4 of them is the board has wanted us to look at if you're living in the home and renting out a room, the board felt like you should be treated differently than if you weren't there, you were renting out your entire house, and that's typically when you have more problems. That's when they become party houses. That's when there's no one there on site providing some sort of oversight in terms of noise and people wandering around and things like that. So we are recommending modifications to the bed and breakfast language. The strike-through language is the existing language in our code. We would recommend that the new language be an owner-occupied dwelling, so it has to be an owner-occupied dwelling, and they can rent to transient lodgers for 30 days or less. The occupancy is limited to 10 people. Again, all of these uses are limited to 10 people or less. If it's more than 10, it's considered a hotel. And with the bed and breakfast, you can provide meals. You're not required to, but there is an option to provide meals. We had been using country inn because that was already a term in our agricultural district and was a CUP use. Since we've sent this ordinance amendment out to some different citizens, and we've gotten some feedback that it's confusing. It's very similar to a hotel. So when we bring this forward to the board, we are going to recommend changing this term country inn to a hotel. So that would be, again, transient lodging for 30 days or less in exchange for a charge, and the occupancy could be greater than 10. So the short-term rentals is more of these Airbnbs that we talked about. So the one that's hosted, it would be an owner-occupied dwelling, and the owner or designee must stay overnight at the dwelling during the rental period, and the occupancy would be limited by the number of residents that are allowed by the septic permit, but they cannot exceed 10. So typically when you have a septic permit, it's based on 2 people per bedroom. So if you have a 3-bedroom house, your occupancy for your septic permit probably is going to be 6. So if you wanted to have a bed and breakfast and you had 2 people live there, husband and wife were living there, they could have 4 renters. So that unless they upgraded their septic system to get to that maximum 10. So is that clear? You give me a confused look? That makes sense? Okay. And then the short-term rental unhosted, you don't have to live in the house. You can rent the entire house out. So those would be more intense uses. So the next slide is going to show you where can these uses occur. So the reds on the right side, the left-hand side, the red, that is our current code. The green chart on the right-hand side is what's proposed by this ordinance amendment. So right now in our existing code, the only transient lodging is you can have bed and breakfast and country inns. Those are all CUP uses in the A1 and the A2. You can see in the green chart, we are doing a pretty substantial extension of these uses. We're adding many different types of uses, and we're also adding them to almost to all of the residential districts. So in the A1 and the A2, if you had a short-term rental hosted, meaning you're an owner-occupied unit, you live in that home, and you're going to live there during the rental periods, you could do it by right with the development standard that I'm going to review with you in later slide. Also, a bed and breakfast, same thing. If you live in the home and you are going to be there during the rental period, you could do that by right in your home with the development standards. So that's a major change. So we're going now from all of these uses being CUP uses to in the A1 and the A2, at a small scale, if you're renting out a room of your home while you live there, that would be a by right use if you met the development standards. The CUP in the A1 and the A2 would be if you didn't live there and you were going to rent out your entire home, or if you were going to do a country inn or a hotel, that would be a CUP use. So that means they'd have to come through the public hearing process. The neighbors would be able to have comments. We could put conditions on it that's appropriate for the site. We could set occupancy limits, all those things at that time. Now again, none of these uses, no transient uses are allowed in any of the residential districts in our existing code. With this proposed ordinance amendment, we are recommending that those smaller scale ones, not the entire rental of the entire house, but the bed and breakfast and then the short-term rental hosted or unhosted could come through the process and ask for a CUP. So those lots are the smaller lots. They could be those RR to RPUD, range anywhere between the 2-acre lots and down to the 15,000 square foot lots. So some places it may be appropriate for them, some places they would not. So that's why there's CUP uses in those, so that they would have to come through the public review process. Is all that clear before I go into the development standards?
John, could you go back to the previous slide?
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of questions. I know you use the term dwelling in both of these, but I don't think either one of these covers the instance where a person has a guest cottage on their property or garage with an apartment over it. I don't see where that's covered in, because you're using the term dwelling as if it has to be the same structure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In my opinion, it could be a separate structure, but we may want to look at some of that language and clear it up. We did not read it that way, but that's a good point to make. And we could definitely take a look at it, because our intention was any dwelling on the property could have it.
Okay, and another question. Earlier you mentioned that if you want to be approved for, say, over the 10 people or whatever, you might have to have your septic system upgraded for more people. Unless the rules have changed, when I built my house here in 1995, the septic permits were issued according to the number of bedrooms in the dwelling. They didn't even ask how many people were going to be living there.
Mm-hmm.
Has that changed?
No, that's correct. So my example was, if you have a 3-bedroom house, your septic permit is approved for 6 people. They consider 2 people per bedroom. So that's how it would be.
Okay, thank you.
But if you wanted, they can approve expansions and additional people on top of that.
If you wanted to upgrade your septic system, you could have up to 10 people, but you could not do more than 10 people at any time without making significant. Once you're over 10 people threshold, you become a hotel, and you have higher development building code standards that you have to meet. So all of these transient uses are 10 people or less.
Okay.
So a country inn is still limited to 10 people, not 10 rooms.
The country inn, we're going to change that term to a hotel, and it would not be restricted, because it would be a CUP. So you would, when it came through the CUP process, the restriction would be based on whatever condition we put on it. So it would be a hotel, so it wouldn't be restricted to 10. It would have to be built at a different building code standard.
So if somebody had an old house and wanted to make it a country inn, and it had 10 rooms, which would be, let's say, 20 people, they couldn't do it. Because if you get to a hotel, the fire code and sprinkler code and all this other building codes,
they could do it if they upgraded all of those things and got a CUP, which is the current.
That's a pretty expensive burden.
Right, but right now they still require. Right now they're currently requiring a CUP, and the building code would would be required too. So that's not any change, whether it's called a country inn or hotel. There would be no change.
Okay, looking at the proposed ordinance, any subdivision, and they all fall into one of these residential ordinances, could make application for a CUP to rent their rooms.
Yes. And that was the point of this, that this is a new use that's being, considered throughout the country. We looked at what uses it was appropriate in to have it by right. We felt like the A1 and A2 were the appropriate locations.
Right.
But if you have a smaller lot and a smaller subdivision, it may or may not be appropriate, depending on the subdivision, depending on the situation, and that's why it would have to go through the public hearing process.
And what the neighbors would have to say about it.
Yes.
Well, it could be restricted by
The
neighborhood.
by
Right.
covenants.
HOA.
That's true.
Restricted covenants could
Because if there's an
prevent.
HOA, most of them are, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you're trying to rent your rooms out to extra rooms.
I was
to
thinking
make some
about
money.
that, but I think our covenants would preclude that.
So does anybody have any questions about the definitions or where these uses are being recommended before I go into the development standards? So right now I'm going to go into the development standards. So these would only be for the by right uses. That would be the short-term rental hosted and the bed and breakfast in an A1 or A2. They could do it by right if they met these following standards. So number one, they would have to register with the county, and I'm going to go over the registration requirements in a slide that's upcoming. So 2, it has to be an owner-occupied dwelling. So the dwelling must be the owner's primary residence. Like for an example, Ms. Pond said she only lived here 50 days out of the year. That would not be considered a primary residence. She would have, whether this ordinance came before or after her, she would have required a CUP because she's short-term rental on hosted. She did not meet these standards. We also put a provision in there because a lot of these concerns with the short-term rental is what if they have a party, what if they're being noisy, what if they're doing something that is disruptive to their neighbors. So we added a provision in there that as part of the registration, they have to provide us some contact information, and the owner or the designee shall stay overnight at the dwelling or be able to return to the dwelling within 60 minutes during any transient occupancy stay. So that means they're not restricted to the house all the time, but they have to stay within 60 minutes. If a problem occurs, the neighbors or the county can call and say, there's an issue.
That's saying that a guest cottage would not be, you would not be able to use it under this, right?
A guest cottage on the property.
Yes. Because it's not their primary residence. Is that not right? Am I not understanding what you said?
I think we're going to have to look, as you brought up previously with the
Right.
word dwelling, and we'll have to look at that compared to other uses like second dwelling unit. You see a lot of those CUPs. So see where the overlap is and whether there's a gap, but I believe the county's intent would not be to exclude people if they're reasonably close. It's like, say, just a little gardener's cottage that has a couple beds in it, and the main unit's like right next door. That's a completely different context than, say, a single wide on one side of the property and a couple acres away is the main house, and so we would definitely want to look at that.
Our intent, though, is a guest cottage would meet this intent as a dwelling.
Same property,
Yes.
it would be fine.
Yes, same property. The owner or designee shall be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to respond to and resolve issues and complaints, and that the designee of the property must be at least 21 years of age. So if you can't be there, you can designate a representative to monitor the property, but they do have to be over the age of 21. Again, we've already talked about this. The occupancy would be limited by the maximum number of residents allowed by the septic system permit. However, in no circumstance shall occupancy exceed 10 people, including the permanent residents and the transient renters. The property shall maintain a residential appearance. Smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors. There shall be at least one carbon monoxide monitor installed and maintained in good working order. And smoke alarms shall be installed and maintained in at least one common area, and in each room providing overnight accommodations. There shall be no outdoor music, amplified or acoustic, after 11 p.m. Again, these are by right uses, so we want to add some things in there about noise. Hunting firearms, renters shall not hunt or discharge firearms on the property. Violations, if there's any violations on the property, they would not be able to advertise or operate the bed and breakfast or short-term rental use if there's any violations to any state or local laws relating to the short-term rental, if that's occurred on more than 3 occasions. So those are the development standards. Any questions on those before I move into the registration?
Are these fairly consistent with Chesterfield, Pamlico, Powhatan?
That's a good question, Mr. Ragacharlie. We worked with the Richmond Regional Planning District Commission, and they actually did a short-term rental analysis of all the short-term rental ordinances throughout the region and throughout the state, and they provided a pretty detailed matrix of all the different things that everybody used and different requirements. This is very comparable to what most people are doing. Some localities make a distinction between the on-hosted and hosted. Some do not. But we felt that was an important distinction to make because we did feel like the character is different based on whether the
10 people pretty consistent.
That is a building code requirement, so that is uniform throughout the entire state. Yes.
I have when this hunting firearms, renter shall not hunt or discharge firearms. What about a property like Orpax where it would probably would want to be able to have people stay overnight and hunt?
Mm-hmm.
Do they? So it's not by right; they'd have to get a CUP to do that, I guess.
Yes.
And they have that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, but someone
Right.
like Ellen, if she wanted, or Mrs. Bonds wanted to allow someone to hunt her property, she would not be allowed to do that without coming and asking.
Just a reminder, these are only for the by right uses, and when we had an Airbnb go through the process, this was one of the concerns from the neighbors, is that they didn't want, people who didn't know anything about the county or where the property lines were to be shooting. So this is all the ones that are by right. So if they are by right, meaning that they live there, you would not be able to shoot a gun. If you wanted to get a CUP, that provision could or could not be placed on it. So if they wanted to have hunting as part of their service that they're going to offer as part of their occupancy as a bed and breakfast or whatever, they can get a CUP and request that not be included as part of their conditions. So remember, these are the ones that are by right. We want to make sure they stay as small and as least impactful as possible. So there is a registration requirement for these by right ones. We are looking at that these would just be an online application that they would file with the county, so they wouldn't even need to come into the office to do that. The registration shall just be pretty basic, requiring their name, address, the phone number of who would be on the property at all times, or their designee. They would need to give this to the county annually, and there'd be no fee or anything. It would just be something that we would want to keep to have the contact information. This is part of the state law. This is items that are exempt from what needs to be registered, and this is directly from the state law. Salespersons and brokers licensed by the real estate board, properties registered as a timeshare, and tourist establishments regulated by the Virginia Department of Health. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Good work. I think it brings a lot of clarity, because to call something a bed and breakfast when they don't serve breakfast doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
Now?
That makes sense to me.
Thank you, Joanne.
Okay.
This is a public comment, public hearing issue. I don't think there's anyone, Sandy, unless you want to come forward and say something. So we'll open and close the public comment period. Any further discussion by the members, questions for the staff?
I move we approve this ordinance.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'd like to compliment the staff. Good work on that.
Yep.
Indeed.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just bring to your attention that the application that was filed by David and Judy Marshall, they had requested a 6-month deferral, which would have come back to you at this meeting. They have withdrawn that application.
Yep.
Okay.
And I have no other business.
Other than a reminder that our next meeting is on June 28th.
Yep. This month.
Rather than July 5th. So we'll have a July meeting in June. All right. Does anyone want a motion adjournment?
I'll do it.
It's been moved, seconded. All in
Yes.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.